Mr. Ambassador, it's always a pleasure to see you here in Ukraine, and we've been lucky to meet you elsewhere.
Last time it was in Munich.
I think in Munich.
That's right.
At the airport,
That's right.
as a matter of fact. But welcome to Ukraine. You've been blessed with beautiful weather.
It has been beautiful weather.
Very propitious occasion. And the first question I'd like to start with is this, sort of chatter we hear from Europeans, some kind of coming a rapprochement with Vladimir Putin. We have European leaders lining up to meet with him. Mr. Macron is saying that we need a reset of relations with Russia, and at the same time, your president, President Trump, has said that it's time to consider readmitting Russia into G7. I mean, what next? Is he going to say that it's time to do away with sanctions? Are we right to be concerned that there will no longer be political will in the U.S. to continue treating Russia as a pariah state?
Right. Well, the first thing I'd like to start with is to congratulate all Ukrainians on the National Day. It was a tremendous day, and it was a great ceremony. And I think that the message of optimism, inspiration, of youth, of future, dynamic, democratic, increasingly prosperous and increasingly Western-oriented country is a great message. And so I really think that came out, and it was a good day for everybody. And I was especially pleased at the youth involvement, and I was especially pleased when I went to the reception later on to see all of the former presidents, other than one, there at the Medinsky Palace as well, because that message of unity of the country in this direction, I think, is really important. So I really congratulate Ukraine on all of that. And even the weather is shining down on everyone just perfectly. Now, to your question about the engagement with Russia, here's how I think about this. No one has any illusions about what Russia is doing in terms of its aggression in Ukraine or its aggression elsewhere. In fact, if you look at U.S. policy toward Russia, we've had the toughest policy on Russia we've had in years. Whether it is on continuing sanctions or increasing those sanctions. We've lifted the arms embargo on arms sales and arms assistance to Ukraine. We have issued a declaration of non-recognition of Russia's annexation of Crimea. We've been much more candid about our language. We've increased our troop presence in Europe. It's further deployed forward in Poland, Baltic states, Romania. We've increased our training and exercise. We have a very strong position. I should add INF treaty to this as well. Very, very strong position. So much so that the risk is that we are too much in confrontation with Russia, and we need to make sure we have channels of dialogue as well. Nobody wants to drift into a conflict. We need to be tough and firm, but we also need to keep open dialogue. When you raise the Council of Europe as an example, it's important to remember that the debate surrounding Russia's participation in the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly was about what is the best way to press Russia on its abuse of human rights. Is the best way to keep Russia out of the Parliamentary Assembly, or is the best way to let them in so we can talk to them about it there? Now, I agree with those who said, no, we should not have let Russia back in. I think that the Council of Europe needs to maintain standards for its own membership. That's where I would come out. But a majority came out on the other side, which is we need to talk with Russia about its human rights abuses, and we need to have them in order to do that. As I said, I don't agree, but none of this was about rewarding Russia or overlooking Russia's human rights abuses. It was about how do you do this best. Concerning the G7, and you raised that, and let me just address that right off the bat. There was a statement from the White House yesterday, you probably saw a question and answer, where the spokesperson at the White House answered the question and said that there's been no Russian request, and this is something that would be not immediately in the G7, but to be addressed in the following year if there is progress. And you'll remember in 2014, Russia was suspended from its participation in the G8 over Russia's claimed annexation of Crimea. I would love to see that reversed. I would love to see Russia get out of Crimea, and if that created the conditions, that would be great. I don't expect that to happen, however, not in that space of time. And in the meantime, between now and next year, it's a long time from now, and President Trump is in Biarritz now with the other leaders of the G7, so I think we should leave it to them to give any further guidance or policy messages.
Mr. Ambassador, in light of future meeting between Presidents Trump and Zelensky, hopefully in Washington, what are the White House's expectations from this meeting? And does this agenda also include such issues which had been raised with previous administration, like de-oligarchization, fighting corruption as well?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the way I would put it is that the U.S. is very supportive of the agenda that President Zelensky laid out during his election campaign and that he has been continuing to discuss in this period before the government has taken office. Strong commitment rhetorically to reform, to fighting corruption, to de-oligarchization, as you said, to integration with the EU, integration with NATO, also strong commitment to doing Ukraine's part, what it can do for peace in the East. We strongly support that entire agenda. He has not had an opportunity to implement that agenda yet. The parliament has not even been seated yet. So that will take place later, or this coming week, I suppose. And then we'll see legislation go through, and we'll see a government formed, we'll see a prime minister, we'll see a foreign minister. And we want to work very closely with the new team on the implementation of that agenda. And we would like to be in a situation that when we have President Zelensky visiting the White House, we will have accomplishments that we can talk about, both what Ukraine has done and that we are doing bilaterally together.
Mr. Ambassador, it has been reported recently that Mr. Rudy Giuliani met with one of Mr. Zelensky's assistants, Mr. Yermak, in Madrid, and reportedly is asking him to have Ukraine lend assistance in investigating the matter of Burisma. It's a commercial company involving one of the sons of a major Democratic Party candidate, but also the alleged 2016 meddling by Ukraine in the U.S. elections. And Kiev Post, has recently come out with a scathing editorial telling Rudy Giuliani essentially to cease and desist and to stop trying to use Ukraine as a trick in the coming 2020 elections. Isn't Mr. Giuliani doing the same thing he's accusing Ukraine of doing in 2016 and meddling in Ukraine's elections? And should Ukraine stay neutral in this?
Right. Well, I'll let Mr. Giuliani speak for himself, but what I think is important is, first off, there are accusations about improper things that took place a few years ago.
You mean here in Ukraine?
Here in Ukraine,
Right.
accusations that improper things took place. Well, the current government has nothing to do with any of that, and I don't think that those accusations should be any obstacle to the development of a close partnership and relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine. We share common values, common interests, we have common agenda for all these things. So let's not let that be an obstacle. So that's why I think it's important if there are concerns anywhere in the U.S. about these things, talk about them. People should talk about them, get to the bottom of them, get them off the table, because they should not be relevant. And then to your question, I completely agree with what you're suggesting in your question. There should not be ever any interference in U.S. elections from abroad or U.S. interference in Ukrainian elections. There just shouldn't be. And so it's important that if there was anything, which I don't even know if there are accusations, but who knows? Let's make sure it doesn't happen in the future.
And just to make it clear, Mr. Giuliani was speaking in his private capacity,
of course,
as a private citizen.
Yeah, he is revered in the U.S. as the mayor of New York City at the time of 9/11.
Right.
He's America's mayor, as we say.
I was there when it
Yeah,
happened.
wow.
Yeah.
That must have been quite something. I was in the White House, and that was also quite something. But he's an important figure, and he is not representing the U.S. government. He is a private citizen, and I just think that we need to get anything that people have any concerns about anywhere off the table, because the U.S.-Ukraine relationship is too important.
Yeah, just a final question to this topic, Mr. Ambassador. If hypothetically this investigation is done here in Ukraine about meddling in U.S. elections in 2016, would it be considered again as a meddling in the U.S. elections, at least by Democratic Party?
I think it's important that we make sure there is no interference or no impact on U.S. elections. That anything that is, investigated or anything that would have happened in the past should be treated as a matter of looking at what happened, not trying to influence anything happening today.
Okay, thank you. Do you hear coherent, constructive messages from the new government regarding the war in the Donbass, including requests to the United States and United Kingdom to join the Normandy format, and also what do you make of its proposed amendments to the Constitution?
On the Normandy format, this is France, Germany, Ukraine, Russia. And they have had meetings even recently, and as always, I've stayed in close touch both with our Ukrainian colleagues and with French and German colleagues. So it's a closely coordinated group. And as I've always said, the issue is not the format, the issue is Russia's political will to actually implement the Minsk agreements. And that's what we need to try to generate, that political will. It has been raised by President Zelensky, among others, that maybe we should try a new format. We're not pushing for it. We are satisfied. The Normandy format is fine with us. But if there are meetings in a wider format, of course we will attend and be supportive there as well.
Mr. Ambassador, there are currently indications that the government of Mr. Zelensky has a kind of not a very typical attitude about the country's media. His chief of staff has made comments to the effect that we don't need traditional media, etc. They repeatedly have refused interview requests with various outlets, and our outlet, the Premier TV channel, has received credible kind of threats of imminent seizure, including from various people surrounding Mr. Zelensky, whether in his immediate circle of aides or outside of it. I mean, is that something on your radar screen as a concern or something to watch for?
Yeah, it is on my radar screen in a number of different ways. Not necessarily how you framed it, but in a number of ways. First off, every healthy democracy needs an independent and diverse media environment. If you don't have that, you don't have a healthy democracy. So that's just a fundamental thing. It is very difficult in the current media environment globally to sustain that. The costs are hard to sustain in that. So how do you create a diverse and independent media environment when it's, you're struggling financially to put the resources together to keep it up? What has happened in a number of places, and this is Ukraine, but not only Ukraine. Look at Italy, look at Hungary, look at Georgia, look at any number of countries. Wealthy individuals or businesses, or sometimes governments, have taken a dominant role in the media, largely because they have the financial means to do so. And that then means that even though they're privately held, you have media that reflects a point of view. We even see this in the U.S., of course, too. I mean, look at CNN and Fox and how those two channels have a point of view that goes into the coverage. So it's difficult to get it right. Ukraine's in a situation where almost every major television station is owned by somebody that has a particular point of view. Some of these are even representing Russian propaganda or Russian interests in Ukraine. So I think there is an issue about how to protect, if you will, the kind of media environment that Ukraine needs and that will make it a healthy democracy. Where we are today is not there, and I think it's a topic that should be discussed in the country, probably even debated in the parliament, about how to create that kind of media environment for a protecting an independent and diverse media environment in the future.
I mean, because we all know that the minute the U.S. congressmen start to hear about problems with media, they will start agitating for some kind of scaling down of, including financial aid to Ukraine. This could be potentially detrimental.
Well, what happens when you raise problems with the media with you as congressmen is they think you're talking about either Fox or CNN, and so you have to say no, elsewhere they also have problems. And in terms of U.S. assistance, look, the U.S. is truly committed to Ukraine's success as a democracy, as a market economy, as a aspiring member of EU and NATO and Euro-Atlantic institutions, and to restoring the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. So we will be deeply engaged with Ukraine no matter what. We do want Ukraine to have the kind of media environment that's worthy of a big democracy like Ukraine.
Well, what Peter said is very important, Mr. Ambassador, because what we saw recently, we saw that one of pro-Russian oligarchs here, who is a politician also, he took control over several TV stations here in Ukraine. But what happens next? The governmental, it's so-called DBR, the Державне бюро розслідувань, Governmental Bureau of Investigation, sends its investigators not to this oligarch, but to Prямий channel to make inquiries and to make investigations about the process, how the channel was bought 2 years ago. And this happens mainly, we think, because of independent policies and criticism which our journalists taken against new government. Are United States concerned about threats to the freedom of speech in Ukraine, Mr. Ambassador?
I don't see any threats to freedom of speech in Ukraine today. I hope that we never see that. I think that this has actually been a vibrant and increasingly open democracy. If you look at the trajectory of Ukraine from 1991 through the Maidan, through recent developments, look at the elections that were free and fair, and really I think people got to express their aspirations through these elections. I think freedom of speech is in great shape in Ukraine, and I hope it stays that way. What I think in terms of media is what I said. I would hate to see a situation where instead of building the future of the country, people start going back and looking at revenge or revenge prosecutions or going after former opponents. That would only divide the country and it would set the country back. I think the country needs to keep looking forward. It's doing so many of the things that Ukraine needs to do and needs to keep going.
And it is precisely what my colleague said when he mentioned this oligarch that has increased his influence over various informational TV channels, and he's said to be connected to Vladimir Putin very directly. You probably know who I'm referring to, and there is a very fine line that Ukraine is walking, and that's precisely why they're buying up these channels, is to provoke Ukraine into cracking down, so that they could then in turn accuse it of violating freedom of speech.
Yeah. So we have in the U.S. in our thinking, at least, I think it's also true in Europe, we do have some very fundamental principles. One of them, of course, is freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of the media. Another principle is that we need to be aware of Russian propaganda, disinformation, and use of that as a state tool to try to undermine our democracies. And we see that in Europe, we see it in the United States, see it in Ukraine. So we need to look at how to prevent Russia from using propaganda to undermine our democracies. One of the things we did in the United States was require RT to be registered as a foreign agent, as an example. And then we also need to look at tools that we have in democracies to ensure the media is diverse and free and fair. One of those would be, again, what we brought up earlier, antitrust legislation. We have rules in the United States that would prevent one individual or one business from owning such a percentage of a media market. That's not something that we would have. And I think it's something that is worth looking at. How do you make sure that no individual or no company has that degree of market share to make sure that there is that diversity in the media?
And now to political situation, we are facing a creeping monopolization of all power in Ukraine. After the presidential and parliamentary elections, party Servant of the People is expected to chair nearly every parliamentary committee, and it still refuses to adopt a new legislation on opposition. Is that a concern for the United States, and what is the United States position regarding this state of affairs, Mr. Ambassador?
Well, Servant of the People, as a political party, President Zelensky had a very big result in the election. They won those seats, fair and square. And so I think it is normal that, given the proportions that they had in support from the public, that's reflected in the parliament as well. I think for the health of Ukrainian democracy, it's always good to have dialogue. Always good to have interchange and support from other parties. When you look at what's the makeup of the parliament now, it's about 85% made up of people who support Ukraine's democracy, reform, peace in the East, anti-corruption, And so there is a lot on which the bulk of that parliament, whether it's in the government or outside of the government, agrees on. And there's a 15% bloc that has a different attitude and a different view. So I think there are a number of opportunities for the government and non-government or opposition political parties in the parliament to work together on some very broad national goals. So I think it's natural. They won the votes. They earned them. At the same time, I hope to see that kind of robust partnership and dialogue on issue by issue as these come up in the country.
But the problem, Mr. Ambassador, is that Party Servant of the People control of over nearly 60% of seats in the parliament, but they want to control nearly 99% of all parliamentary committees. Apart from that, there is also one big problem that, according to Ukrainian political tradition, opposition was always given a control of several key parliamentary committees, like Committee on Freedom of Speech, on a budget, for instance, or on MPs' ethics. Nothing like this is going to happen this time. Is this something we should be concerned of? Because I'd like to insist, this is exactly a sign of monopolization of power.
Yeah, I think, again, I'm just going to be repeating myself, but I think when you win an election like that, you have a right to form a government, you have a right to chair the parliament, and you put people in charge of parliamentary committees. It should not be exclusive. Other people won votes too. You know, the Timoshenko bloc won votes, the Vakarchuk people won votes, President Poroshenko's party won votes. Everybody should have some representation there. That's to be negotiated out, I would say, within the parliament as it takes office. It's not for us to say how it should be done. But I think it's important that the will of the people, which, as I said, 85% in terms of the direction of the country, needs to be reflected in the way the parliament is put together as well.
75%.
75%, sorry. 75%.
Mr. Ambassador, your assistants are already signaling to us, and the very stark fact is that you have to rush off to the airport, leaving Ukraine.
This is true.
It's a double pleasure and an honor that you met with us and you were able to squeeze us in on this beautiful day. As always, such a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank you.
bon voyage to you.
Thank you.
Just one final question, Ambassador, if you don't mind.
Another question.
Yeah, just final question.
Very short.
What would be the dates of visit of Mr. Zelensky
We don't
to the
have dates
sea?
yet.
Is it going to happen during the next months, or we're talking
Possibly
about weeks?
in Warsaw?
It's possible that it was certainly both leaders are expected to be in Warsaw, so we are
Right.
hoping that they manage to pull aside and have a conversation there. We are still working on dates for a White House visit.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
President. Thank you so much.